We begin with President Trump's authoritarian ambitions. In an exclusive new interview with the Daily Caller, Trump was asked whether he'd be comfortable seeing former FBI Director James Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan arrested live on television as part of his administration's new focus on the Russia election interference investigation. His response would not bother me at all. That attitude, punishing perceived enemies while rewarding devotees, is exactly what we're seeing across the federal government. At the Centers for Disease Control, Trump has already installed a new hand-picked loyalist, a business investor with no medical training, to replace a career scientist to run your nation's top public health agency. Then there's the Federal Reserve, where emergency hearings are underway right now after Trump's attempt to oust Fed Board Governor Lisa Cook over alleged mortgage fraud, even though she has not been charged with any crime. But the aim is clear: get her out so he can put in a loyalist. And that's become Trump's playbook across the government, forcing out officials at the CIA, the Department of Transportation, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, institutions where nonpartisanship is essential to what they do. It's their lifeblood. Trump is also ramping up his war on blue cities, manufacturing crisis after crisis as a means to seize more power. In addition to National Guard deployments, Trump is threatening new immigration crackdowns in Boston and Chicago using agents from ICE and Border Patrol, agencies whose budget Trump tripled this year. And if you're wondering how far he intends to take this, well, folks, here's your president in his own words.
So the line is that I'm a dictator, but I stop crime. So a lot of people say, you know, if that's the case, I'd rather have a dictator. But I'm not a dictator. I have the right to do anything I want to do. I'm the president of the United States. If I think our country's in danger, and it is in danger in these cities, I can do it. They say, we don't need him. Freedom, freedom. He's a dictator. He's a dictator. A lot of people are saying maybe we like a dictator.
Joining us now, Executive Chair of the Democracy Defenders Fund and former White House ethics czar under President Obama, Norm Eisen, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst Joyce Vance, and former DHS Chief of Staff during Donald Trump's first term and author of Blowback, Miles Taylor. Miles, I want to start with you because the president saying, I have the right to do anything I want to do, I'm the president of the United States, should be ringing off alarm bells for more than just us at this table and at home on this panel. It feels like that's not happening. What do you think is going on?
Incredibly, Eugene, I think people still aren't taking him seriously, but we saw him make the same comments 5 years ago. I mean, during the COVID pandemic, we all remember when Donald Trump said, you know, when you are the president of the United States, the authority is total, and that's the way it's got to be. And his allies at the time said, well, look, it's just a figure of speech. He's just joking. We've been saying that for far too long. Donald Trump is not joking. And, you know, even with this interview with the Daily Beast about Comey and Brennan, I don't know if he's going to try to arrest Comey and Brennan. He is going to try to arrest his enemies, though. He is under withering pressure to do that. And whether you think he's got cases or he doesn't have cases, to him, it does not matter. He has to put people in handcuffs. At least in his mind, that's what he thinks has to happen. But it's so much bigger than that. I mean, the revenge, Eugene, as you already noted, extends to people's cities. It extends to their money. He's going into places like Chicago. If he pushes Lisa Cook out of the Fed, it's just a step away from him fully taking over the Fed. And I think a lot of Americans don't understand what that actually means. But we have a really, really clear playbook of what happens when a would-be authoritarian takes over monetary policy in a country. And it typically results in runaway inflation, increase in the price of goods, destabilization of the economy, and capital flight. People will stop investing in the United States, the U.S. dollar will suffer, and your average American will see their savings account become worthless. That's what it means, and that's why people need to realize Trump's revenge campaign is not some abstract thing that doesn't affect them.
I do want to stay on the topic of Lisa Cook for a minute. Norm, can you explain to us what exactly the state of play is with Ms. Cook and whether or not she's going to be able to maintain her job? I mean, it does, not to be dramatic here, but it does sound like the potential stability of the global economy sort of hangs in the balance.
Yeah, just something small like that.
I mean, if she is ousted, Trump puts in an appointee, he gets what he wants in terms of lowering interest rates. I mean, it could send the market into some red zone here.
And Norm, you are one of her lawyers.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much you're allowed to disclose, but we'd love to hear
Disclose
what's
a lot.
going
No
on.
one's watching. It's just
Jackie, at Democracy Defenders Fund, we have over 125 legal matters, including representing Lisa Cook together with the great folks at Lowell and Associates. I think on that case, because it is active litigation, as much as I love y'all, I'm going to say we filed some powerful complaint, brief. We had a lengthy argument in court last week, and we'll be filing another submission on Tuesday morning. And I'm going to rest on those arguments and the papers.
But in terms of you having the ability to clear state the facts, clear the record, did she commit mortgage fraud as the Trump administration is alleging?
I'm just going to stick with what we've said in argument and what we've said in the papers. Keep a sharp eye out. Tuesday morning, we'll have another very hard-hitting filing for you.
You should bring us the news here first. But I also, Joyce, there was another thing that happened this week when it comes to the rule of law, and that was that federal judge Gia Cobb ruled that the Trump administration cannot use expedited removal of undocumented immigrants in the way that they wanted to, which would allow them to fast track the deportation process. And expedited removal, meaning that they wouldn't have to have a hearing, is why the administration wanted to do that. And Judge Gia Cobb in her ruling said that, quote, the government makes a truly startling argument that those who enter the country illegally are entitled to no process under the Fifth Amendment, but instead must accept whatever grace Congress affords them. Were that right, not only non-citizens, but everyone would be at risk. Fortunately, that is not the law. When you're looking at this ruling, Joyce, what exactly do you think this means for the future of due process in the country?
Well, this is a case, pardon me, this is a case that's incredibly important, and it got lost a little bit in the press of news this week. You know, for decades, people who arrive at the border without documentation can be summarily returned to their point of origin. That's the way that process has worked. The Trump administration is trying to expand that sort of expedited removal and make it happen further in from the border, often with people who have been here, in their words, people who can't prove that they've been here for more than 2 years. And of course, that proof can be very difficult if you're here without documentation. So this is part of their effort to ramp up their statistics so that they can claim political success. But the impact, and this is what Judge Cobb wrote so eloquently about, is it puts all of us at risk. We've seen this in some of the earlier deportation roundups. They pick folks up. They're not careful to check whether they're American citizens or not, whether they're green card holders or not, and they deport people with little or no recourse. That means that a denial of due process to people who don't have documented immigration status denies all of our due process potentially, and this case is definitely one to watch.
Miles, I want to throw up this retruth that Trump did. It says, the world will soon understand nothing can stop what's coming. It has Q+ on his hand. I think they assume that's a nod to the QAnon conspiracy theory. It doesn't seem like he created this. Maybe he did, but this is, a retruth. What does it say that the president does this? It feels like sometimes that he and his team want us all to freak out about it. But then with all of the actions that are happening, it's hard to not see this as part of a strategy.
Well, I think we can safely assume we're not going to see the administration moderate anytime soon. I think anyone who had on their bingo card that Donald Trump was going to tack towards the center and be a unifier is going to lose that game of bingo. So, look, I mean, a lot of times when he does things like this on social media, it's bluster. And yet there are certainly a lot of very shocking policy decisions in the pipeline. And you've seen other Trump allies in recent days post similar things. Laura Loomer, a few days ago, posted something very similar, warning about what was coming. In that case, making reference to journalists who are trying to protect their sources. And I've been saying for a while now that it's likely going to happen that we see the Trump administration going after journalists, going after their sources, and threatening them that if they don't give up those sources in news stories that were damaging to the president, that they'll try to throw them in jail. And they're going to try to open up Espionage Act cases over this. I mean, that's my assessment, and I think it's probably going to bear out. But, look, you have to look no further than Chicago to see how dramatic that this could get. I mean, Eugene, we've talked about this almost every Sunday the past few weeks, but it seems like every time I come on and join you guys, there's a new city that the United States military is planning to head to under Donald Trump. Now, it's not totally clear yet that the military is going to go to Chicago. It doesn't escape my imagination that they're going to deploy the National Guard. But what you will hear this week is people talking more about the Insurrection Act, because Chicago is going to be the first place where we really see an initial resistance to boots on the ground. And that's the Trump card, so to speak, that Donald Trump and Stephen Miller have hinted at for years, is using the Insurrection Act to allow the military to enforce the laws in Chicago and depriving those local leaders of any say whatsoever. Whether or not they do that this week remains to be seen, but that conversation is going to start again this week in earnest.
Janet Yellen is a pioneer in the annals of Washington. She's the first woman to head the Federal Reserve as well as the United States Treasury. She's the first person in American history to have led the Fed, the Treasury, and the White House Council of Economic Advisors. Born in Brooklyn and educated at Brown, she went on to Yale University to earn her Ph.D. in economics. She was an assistant professor at Harvard when she began working at the Federal Reserve Board in the 1970s. By the 1980s, she had joined the faculty at the University of California at Berkeley, where she researched, along with her fellow economist husband, why companies would pay more than they needed to hire and retain their employees. The research found that businesses were rewarded with higher productivity when they offered better pay and working conditions. In 1994, President Bill Clinton appointed Yellen to the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors. 3 years later, Clinton named Yellen the chair of his Council of Economic Advisors. In 2004, she returned to the Fed to serve as the Federal Reserve Bank of the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. And that's when she was given, when America's housing bubble popped in 2008 and triggered a financial crisis that led to the worst recession since the Great Depression. In 2010, President Barack Obama appointed Janet Yellen vice chair of the Federal Reserve. And in 2013, Obama nominated Yellen to be the Fed chair, an office she held until 2018. That's when President Donald Trump, in his first term in office, decided against renominating Yellen to lead the Fed and instead nominated today's current Fed chair, Jerome Powell. Yellen later went on to serve as President Joe Biden's Treasury Secretary from 2021 until January of this year. Now the Fed is front and center in the news with President Trump back, this time openly threatening the independence of America's central bank. He's publicly chastised the chairman, Powell, for not heeding his call to slash interest rates. Trump has accused Powell of mismanaging funds during the renovation of the Fed headquarters in Washington and threatened to fire him for cause, which is the only way a Fed chair can actually be forced out before his term ends next year. Trump has already fired Lisa Cook, a Fed governor who the president accuses of committing mortgage fraud. Cook says she will contest Trump's move in court and has refused to step down. In a way, Janet Yellen was the opening salvo of President Trump's attempts to reshape the Fed into his political tool. Up until Yellen, it was standard practice for presidents to nominate sitting Fed chairs to serve additional terms. Trump broke that norm then and is now going much farther to shatter old norms and to seize control of the Fed. All this as the Fed's dual mandate of managing inflation and promoting full employment is starting to show real strain as the economy today encounters both rising prices and weaker hiring, fueled in part by the president's trade agenda. Joining me now is Janet Yellen, economist, former United States Secretary of the Treasury, former chair of the Federal Reserve from 2014 to 2018. She is now a distinguished fellow in residence at the Brookings Institution, and a really hard person to interview because I don't know what title to use with you because you have all the titles. So welcome, Janet Yellen, to our show.
Thanks so much, Ollie. Thanks for the invitation.
Let's talk, first of all, about this thing that is an abstraction to most people who don't study it, the independence of the Fed, which is a model that has been copied around the world. The idea that the Federal Reserve should not be subject to political whims. It's really important because all presidents would like high growth and low interest rates, right, in all countries. If you mess with that, there are potentially very, very serious consequences.
Yes, we've seen that in many countries because politicians tend to use monetary policy for political purposes, either to win elections or, in many cases, to try to reduce the cost of financing large deficits or outstanding debts. And what President Trump has said, the reason that he wants to influence the Fed is the United States has a $37 trillion outstanding debt. The interest cost on that is around $1 trillion. And if we could get interest rates down, that would fall. That service cost would fall meaningfully. And this is a thought that many heads of state have had and thought, let's pressure our central bank to do exactly that, lower interest rates. It juices the economy, gets down interest expense. And this is the basic recipe for high inflation or hyperinflation. We've seen this very recently in countries like Turkey, which just a year or so ago had around an 80% inflation rate, and a year or so ago also in Argentina with similarly high inflation. And of course, we can go back to Germany in the 1920s or Hungary after World War II. In every case, it's a central bank that isn't independent, a head of state that wants low interest rates or wants to be able to have its central bank buy up the debt and print money. And this is the recipe for runaway inflation. So Americans need to worry about that, and especially because the dollar is the bedrock currency and U.S. Treasuries, the fundamental safe asset in the entire global financial system. All of that rests on good management of monetary policy. And as you said, independent central banks, this doesn't mean the central bank sets its own goal or goals. In the United States, Congress has mandated legally the goals of price stability and maximum employment. In many countries around the world, it's similar. Always price stability or low inflation is a mandated goal. And what independence means is that the technocrats who at the central bank use economic reasoning, data, to try to figure out what are the best settings of monetary policy to achieve these goals, free of political interference. And that is what President Trump is putting at risk. And there will be a cost to every American that could be profound if this is allowed to happen.
So part of you've obviously had a great deal of experience with recessions. We have several of them. You also started your career at the Fed in the midst of inflation, but we don't have as much of a memory of inflation in the United States. But in terms of the toolbox available to the central bank, to the Federal Reserve, inflation, long-term out-of-control inflation is a much bigger problem. We actually have pretty good tools to fix recessions. You get some creative destruction, but you can lower interest rates, you can flood the zone, and you can get the economy back on track. You get stuck in long-term inflation, you can ruin your country.
Well, it can be very difficult to bring inflation down when it becomes ingrained because we've seen this in the 1970s and early 80s in the United States. When you have chronic high inflation, households, workers, businesses come to expect it, and they base their pricing decisions on the notion it will continue. And it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then the only way to really get it down is to really hit the economy with weak conditions, high unemployment, to really force inflation down and eventually bring inflation expectations down with it. And Volcker, some people may remember in 1982 or 83, he was faced with very high inflation. He said, I'm going to change this and show people this is going to come to an end. And we had one of the deepest recessions of the post-war period, but he did succeed in bringing it down. And he established credibility for the Federal Reserve, which it has prized and taken very seriously, that it has an obligation to anchor inflationary expectations at a low level, at levels consistent with price stability, or the Fed's interpretation is 2%, according to the price index that they measure inflation by.
New reaction today as President Trump targets more American cities for possible National Guard deployment. Here's Maryland's governor.
If the President of the United States were to have a serious conversation with me and say, what can we do, particularly when you look at the cost of the National Guard of well over $1 million a day, what could we actually do? Do you know what I would tell him? I would tell him things like, we need to make sure we're increasing funding for local law enforcement, and we have to invest in our community groups and community organizations. Like, that's a serious approach, how to address this issue. But asking me to deploy my National Guard, people who are not trained for municipal policing, is just not a serious approach.
And this comes as federal authorities prepare to flood Chicago in just a few days. Well, joining me now is National Action Network president and host of Politics Nations here at MSNBC, Reverend Al Sharpton. Good to see you, my friend, on this Labor Day weekend. So, Rev, you have Maryland Governor Wes Moore there, who seems to be taking a harder line against Trump. A headline, in fact, in the Washington Post marks this shift, reading, "Why Maryland's governor leaned into a fight with Trump. This one is personal." What's your takeaway, Rev, from his remarks and what might have caused Moore to change his tone?
I think that what Moore is changing his tone, or it appears to be, is consistent with his position all along. And that is that there is clear evidence, clear data that says crime is going down in Baltimore and other places that the president has mentioned. And now he's using the whole question of going after immigrants, people that are migrants that are here, using ICE to really come into these cities. And these cities are certainly showing that they can rise to the occasion of bringing down crime and dealing with the question of immigration. And I think that what the president has done and has done consistently is go after cities with black mayors, and in the state of Maryland, a black governor.
Well, local leaders in Chicago are certainly bracing for a wave of ICE and Border Patrol agents sometime this week amid some very vocal pushback. Listen to this.
What his ultimate desire is to come into our city, to break the Constitution, and to break our democracy, and to break our city. He is reckless and out of control. He is the biggest threat to our democracy that we've experienced in the history of our country.
Chicago Mayor Johnson there. So are all of these decisions from Trump leading further away from democracy into autocracy? I mean, what is the message that the administration is sending, Rev?
The message is that the president is seeking to be what he joked about, or was he joking, is the question, about a dictatorship. Isn't it ironic that the Republican Party and the conservatives in general were the ones saying that national government should not interfere with states? They were the states' rights party. And now all of a sudden they want national government to do exactly that. So this is clearly an overreach, and it will not protect citizens from either those that are criminal that have been here as immigrants, or those that are committing crimes in these cities. The real question is, why is this president being very selective? Crime rates are higher in the home borough or the home district of the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, than it is in the whole state of Maryland, in Baltimore or in Chicago. Why aren't we sending National Guard there? Why aren't we sending ICE other places? Why is this being so selective. So he's trying to feed red meat to his base, and he's trying to, in my opinion, profile blacks in higher office.
So, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson was recently on Morning Joe, where he was unclear whether he would welcome federal funding for law enforcement. Take a listen, Rev.
Do you believe the streets of Chicago would be safer if you got all of those other extraordinary programs put back into place, which do have a history of being successful, if that's complemented by having 5,000 more cops on the streets of Chicago?
I don't believe that we should narrow it down to just police officers, Joe, is what I'm saying. That is an antiquated approach. I'm saying we've invested in detectives.
Mr. Mayor, are you hearing what I'm saying? I'm agreeing with you that all of these other social programs are extraordinarily important. I just need a yes or a no.
What's your takeaway from that exchange, Rev?
My takeaway is that clearly the mayor, who will be on Politics Nation today, is saying that you cannot deal with an end result without dealing with root causes, because then you're only going to be getting the same results. They need to have programs funded. They need local police funded. When you see cities where they've taken away $1 billion from what is needed in the city in terms of these areas that they claim they're concerned about, then how is the remedy to bring in federal officers, law enforcement, or designated by the federal government? Are we trying to find a solution? Or are we trying to scapegoat people for a problem that all of us are concerned about? And there is documented evidence that we have been dealing adequately in some of these cities. The ones he's named, all of these cities, they've been adequately taking crime down and doing what they're supposed to do in terms of dealing with immigrants.
Okay. Thank you, Rev. Appreciate your time as always.
As Congress returns from summer recess, the Jeffrey Epstein scandal is back on the agenda. The Epstein estate plans to hand over the convicted sex offender's birthday book and other documents to Congress on September 8th. The book is reportedly, as you know, filled with well wishes from friends and associates, including an explicit message and drawing by President Trump, which Trump denies he did. But most importantly, lawmakers and the public will get to hear more firsthand accounts from Epstein survivors. The Washington Post reports that House Oversight Chair James Comer and members of his committee will meet privately with some of the survivors on Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, Epstein survivors, including our next guest, will join Congressman Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie at a press conference on Capitol Hill. Joining us now are those Epstein survivors, Jess Michaels and Teresa Helm. Teresa is also a survivor services coordinator at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Thank you both so much for coming on the weekend. Jess, I want to start with you. You will be meeting with at least Ro Khanna on Capitol Hill. Are you hoping that more Republicans add you to their docket, that you meet with Comer? And if you were to meet with some of these Republicans and James Comer, what would you say to them?
I think what we're looking for with all of these meetings is courage on the part of Republican representatives, because this is most importantly a bipartisan issue. This is not something that anyone on any side of the aisle should be for. No one should be for child sex trafficking and allowing perpetrators to escape justice, and no one should be for systems failing to prosecute over decades.
And I want to ask both of you, actually. We are seeing a little bit of movement in Congress. I mean, House Oversight Chairman James Comer, as Eugene noted, is going to be meeting with survivors on Tuesday. I'm not sure if both of you are on his docket. There are also a number of documents that he says he has subpoenaed for and is going to potentially release from the Epstein estate. But one, are you planning on getting on James Comer's schedule? And then two, what would you like to hear from the White House on this? And what does their lack of acknowledging any of this mean to both of you?
Go ahead, Teresa.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Jess, good to see you here.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Nice to meet you, too. I look forward to seeing you in a few days. Yes, I hope to meet with as many people who are willing to listen. I think it's very important for us to finally get at least some kind of FaceTime here on the subject. And what I would really be hopeful that I see from the White House and the administration is support on this, and not willing to, at this point, I feel like we've gone further past the point of survivors being not even at the table or in the discussion. We've gone to the point of being almost even silenced or just entirely bypassed. So I'm hopeful for support is what I'm hopeful for, and the acknowledgement, and to stand with us like we stand with them. We are all in this together. We all want to protect children. We all have the obligation and the responsibility to protect children and people in general. So support would be truly, truly wonderful. We are all, this is just humanity, dignity. This is what this is. This support would be wonderful.
Yeah.
And I think, Jess, I just want to get you on that as well. What are you in talks with James Comer's office?
I won't be in James Comer's office, but I will have other opportunities to be speaking to representatives. But there's something that's also, I think, being missed by a lot of people. The American people are with Epstein survivors. They are, if you've looked at any of my comments on social media, people are appalled at what's happening. They want justice, not just for us. They understand that this affects them and how justice is going to play out in the future for if this ever happens again. We need systemic change, looking at all the failures that have happened over decades. And we need to have policy change that's going to make sure that none of this happens again. Nothing has changed, as I understand it, since Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced and put in prison. Nothing has changed in any of those policies. We are asking, and we seem to be now, we seem to have become the representative of a lot of sexual assault survivors out there that have never been heard and never been seen. So I do think that the wise thing would be for this administration and anyone meeting with us is to stand with us and support us, because there is not a single person in this country that would ever say, yes, all of this is okay as is.
Jess and Teresa, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'd like to read the statement from the family of Epstein accuser Virginia Giuffre, who, as you both know, died by suicide. The family was talking about the Ghislaine Maxwell transcripts that were released from Todd Blanche's interview with Maxwell. And in it, they say about that transcript, this travesty of justice entirely invalidates the experiences of the many brave survivors who put their safety, security, and lives on the line to ensure her conviction, including our sister. During Todd Blanche's bizarre interview, she is never challenged about her court-proven lies, providing her a platform to rewrite history. Teresa, what is your reaction to the released transcripts of this interview with a convicted sex trafficker, Maxwell?
Yes, I can very clearly tell you I felt pretty gutted, to be perfectly clear and honest on that. I sat and listened to this woman's calm, articulate voice. And you know what? That is the same calm and articulate voice that led me to believe that I was in a safe environment. And that is the same calm voice that led me to walk myself to Jeffrey's home after meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell that day. I entirely, wholeheartedly agree with Virginia's family. And I was appalled. I'm continued to be appalled at the release and just the entire situation surrounding this interview with Ghislaine Maxwell. It is absolutely, it goes so far beyond throwing salt on wounds or anything like that. it's entirely destructive to survivors such as myself that had gone through personal experience with her, lived experience with Ghislaine Maxwell. And it entirely is devastating to the entire survivor community that if we're going to give this woman a platform and elevate her voice when the only voices that should be continued to be elevated and platformed are the survivors of this case and many other cases, I entirely agree with Jess on this as far as systemic review, reform, because this goes so far beyond, this is such a high profile case, and I get that. And it goes so much, it touches every single solitary soul on this earth, really, because the magnitude of assault and sexual abuse and violence that we have, this touches everyone.
Yeah, and we are still waiting to see whether or not Ghislaine Maxwell will come and testify before Congress in a very public setting where both Republicans and Democrats will be able to ask her questions. Jess Michaels and Teresa Helm, thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing your stories.
We begin this hour with some crucial dispatches from the front lines of the citizens' resistance, your resistance, that has taken shape over these past months as Donald Trump, complicit Republicans have waged relentless attacks on our democratic institutions. And that brings us this morning to the town of Cape May, New Jersey. Might seem like an unlikely front line of the resistance, yet every Saturday, a small but dedicated group known as the Bridge Brigade gathers at the local pedestrian overpass with protest signs, refusing to let their neighbors forget that their democracy is under siege. The first gathering in March drew maybe 10 people. Since then, they've shown up nearly every Saturday, rain or shine. Now they average about 20 people. On the 4th of July, nearly 30 turned out. It's not a lot of people. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make national headlines. But it is resistance. And those protesters are persistent. Their goal is not simply the time-honored tradition of protest. It is also community building. Their weekly presence is a civic drumbeat, a reminder that Trump's power is not inevitable, nor is it impenetrable. It is a reminder that they will not get used to what is happening, and that people still care enough to show up. It may seem like a small gesture, but few of the greatest human-powered civil rights movements in history were sustained by one or even several grand moments. Movements, protests, and democracy itself endure because of the steady commitment of ordinary people. Proof that the quest for freedom, equality, and liberty and the will to resist in defense of those things is stronger than any effort to silence it. It's not just protests. Civic courage comes in many forms. Small acts of defiance add up. There's the citizen who refuses to look away when ICE comes for a neighbor. The teacher who makes every child feel welcome and valued. The organizers knocking on doors to speak face to face with voters, making sure Medicaid cuts can't be buried under spin or from online disinformation. Together, these acts keep us from sliding into normalization. Together, these acts hold us all accountable to one another. Focusing only on the outcome misses the point. Because every single wrench thrown into the authoritarian wheel slows it down and rips up its gears. Philosophers Michael Brownstein and Alex Madva warn in the New York Times that the danger isn't in losing. The danger is in doing nothing. Inaction is defeat. It allows strong men to rewrite reality unchallenged. Losing loudly, they argue, preserves a record of dissent. It shifts public opinion. It keeps the contest alive. As they put it, quote, when people fight principled battles that they know they may lose, others pay attention. The Texas Democrats' stand gave us their cause time to move the needle of public perception. Their battle invigorated a nationwide conversation about how elected leaders can resist America's anti-democratic turn. Texas Democrats fought a battle they almost certainly expected to lose in order to help the rest of us grasp the stakes of current events. Their choice reflected a core tenet of collective action. They demonstrated for those of us who believe in free and fair elections and in democracy itself that there are moments when we cannot wait around for someone else to do something. So, now, Texas Democrats walking out on gerrymanders didn't stop Republicans from rigging the map, but they inspired other states to fight fire with their own redistricting maps. The civil rights hero John Lewis did not see immediate change when he marched in Selma in 1965, but he and those who marched with him forced a nation to reckon with the violence that stood in the way of democracy. Today, these small acts of resistance are unfolding across America, carried out by ordinary people far from the halls of power. In Manhattan, the city comptroller, Brad Lander, and other activists have been showing up to immigration court to observe ICE proceedings. In June, Lander was arrested after linking arms with a man who agents were trying to detain. Now he's urging migrants to skip court hearings altogether, calling them abduction traps. But here's the thing. This isn't Brad Lander's job. He's the New York City comptroller. He was there as a citizen, albeit a citizen with some authority. But going to court to bear witness and stand in solidarity with undocumented immigrants is something open to all of us. It's something an increasing number of Americans are, in fact, doing. For some Americans, the resistance has gone beyond quiet protest. Ali Mistal observes that at all points in history, there are people who are willing to break the law when the law is evil. Martin Luther King Jr., in his famous letter from Birmingham jail, addressed that moral challenge directly in response to 8 white clergymen who had denounced his nonviolent protests as the work of an extremist. King wrote, quote, "There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. There is certainly a legitimate concern. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are 2 types of laws, just and unjust. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. Americans are also fighting for their democracy in town halls across the country, where citizens are holding their leaders' feet to the fire and demanding answers of them. On Wednesday night, the Republican Congressman Barry Moore of Alabama was heckled so relentlessly in Baldwin County that he fled through the back door without even saying goodbye. That's probably because chants of shame followed him out of the room. Before his great escape, Moore was grilled on everything from Medicare cuts and rural hospital closures to tariffs, immigration, and abortion, and Trump's deployment of the National Guard in Washington, D.C. Moore is far from alone. The few members of Congress who've dared to hold town halls this August have faced angry crowds, Republicans and Democrats alike, demanding answers on immigration, Medicaid cuts, the war in Gaza, and more. In Maine, Republican Senator Susan Collins was drowned out by protesters at a ribbon-cutting ceremony as chants of shame, shame, shame rang out. In Ohio, Republican Congressman Warren Davidson tried to tout what he called Trump's big wins at his town hall, only to be met with outrage over the National Guard's deployment to Washington and Trump's cruel treatment of undocumented immigrants. And Republicans Mark Alford of Missouri and Josh Brecheen of Oklahoma faced equally hostile audiences this week, again pressed over Trump's decision to send the National Guard into Washington and Los Angeles. This is how power shifts. Not through poll-tested speeches, but through individual acts of courage, through the audacity of crowds that drive the powerful out the back door, through neighbors who refuse to comply with cruelty. As Mistal puts it, quote, anything we do, anything at all to slow, frustrate, or sabotage our government's efforts or to help another person who is being made to suffer by these people has value. To do nothing is to be complicit in the horrors we are visiting upon the world. These people want us to give in to despair. They want us to give up. They want us to look at their scoreboard of victories and determine that the game is unwinnable. So I'm playing a different game, one that is not about winning or losing, but helping or not helping. That is what we can do for now. It's a good reminder for all of us. Democracy's defenders are already in the fight. They're on the bridges in Cape May. They're in the parks and the plazas of our cities and the heart of Trump country, in courthouses from New York to San Diego, in town halls where citizens refuse to let the lies stand. They're turning Labor Day into another No King's Day protest. They're marching in Bernie Sanders' Workers Over Billionaires rallies. Ordinary people in every corner of this country are declaring we will not bend the knee. That's where the fight for democracy lives now, in your local communities, far, far from the halls of power.